We discovered a hearty soup recipe that uses shelf-stable foods and will feed 8 people for about $1. Yeah, you heard that right. $1. Check this out. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene, and today we're kind of excited. So one of our friends sent us this recipe for Scotch broth, or otherwise known as survival soup. And as we kind of did our research and we're looking around the internet, we found that there's some miscalculations that have gone on with this. But in and of itself, it's actually a fabulous meal for your food storage, especially when times get tough. It's a combination of grains and legumes. Specifically, it has 15 pounds of white rice, and originally it had 4 pounds of the barley.
Right.
But you changed that.
I changed that because the buckets that we're talking about would provide between 40 and 50 meals. And to get there, we needed more of the barley, especially because the barley has lots of calories that you're looking for. So
super healthy.
We bumped up this from the recipe that we had originally gotten.
And then the recipe also called for kidney beans or red beans, and we just did red beans because we like kidney beans in very small quantities. Lentils, and 4 pounds of lentils, and then 3 pounds of black beans, 2 pounds of split peas, and then it called for 2 pounds of garbanzo beans.
I'm not much a fan of garbanzo beans or chickpeas, so.
And we could have substituted lima beans for that, but I'm not a fan of that. But we could both agree on white beans. And so 2 pounds of white beans. And so that's kind of what we are looking at for this recipe. Now, why don't you help us out and explain the nutrition behind it and all that good stuff?
Okay, you can monkey around with this as much as you want. It's, this is not a set recipe that has to be followed. I mean, you could change if you like pinto beans. You could add pinto beans and take one of the others out. But let's talk just a little bit about maybe some of the fallacy that some people have purported out there.
Well, okay, maybe I should say something. So they said that if you have 5 buckets of this stored, that you could feed how many people for a year? Was it 4 people for a year?
I think so, yes.
No way! You should have 60 pounds per person of legumes in addition to at least 300 or 400 pounds of grain. And so that totally doesn't make sense.
Just doesn't add up.
Does it mean that you could have soup frequently if you had that? Yeah, that's what it means. It doesn't mean that you could survive on it.
Right. So this recipe calls for basically 3/4 of a cup of the beans, and then your rice and lentils and split peas. The total calories for one batch of this is 1,139 calories. So you can see right there, that's not even enough for one person. If you had that all day, you're still only about halfway to where you need to be.
And they said it should be for 8 people. So 1,100 calories divided by 8 people.
Then we cut that in half. We're in the 140 range. So yeah, this isn't going to cut it from a caloric standpoint. From a standpoint of protein, we're looking at a total of about 49 grams of protein, which is about what I figure I should have in a day just for me. So again,
I should have a lot more than that.
We're short on protein. The carbohydrates, it does have 253 grams of carbohydrates. So, and that's of course where we're getting energy to fuel our bodies, but that's not really going to get us very far. And then the fats, we're almost at 0. We're at 1.98 grams of fat in this whole thing. So this is a great soup, but it really can't do what some people are saying it does out there, that it can feed you well.
So now that your eyes are wide open and you know for sure what this really is, this is a fantastic frugal friendly food because it allows us to be able to, on very little cost, right, to be able to help to feed our family. And that's one of the great reasons why we wanted to share this recipe for the Scotch broth with you. Now, we did change this again a little bit from the first recipe. So what we did is we mixed together the white beans, the red beans, and the black beans. And we soaked those for a little while, because if we soak them, then that enables us to reduce the amount of time that we have to cook. We also used a pressure cooker. So I cook this in the Instant Pot. You could use a stovetop pressure cooker. You could also just use a pot and cook it on the stove, or like right now, it's snowing out there, or it's snowy. And so we weren't able to use our sun oven, but you could also not use any fuel when you make this if you're using a sun oven, which could be great for, a lot of the year around here.
Right.
We're just having some great wet weather lately. So the first thing I did was I mixed the beans together. The actual recipe said to put the split peas and the lentils in there also. I don't like those really mushy. And so since they have a similar cook time to the rice and the barley, we actually mixed rice, the barley, the lentils, and the split peas together. We rinsed them really well, because you always want to rinse those. And then we added them after the beans were soft, because that'll take less time to cook. And then we cooked it for an additional about 30 minutes until it was all good. We added, now you could add anything you want to this, but what we added was some of the dehydrated carrots and dehydrated onions.
Yeah.
This would be great, these bouillon cubes. I'm a little bit sensitive to chemicals, so I like to do my own broth. And I just put in some of my homemade chicken broth that I had made, salt and some pepper. And I also put in a little bit of celery. And quite frankly, the soup was really good. I had intended for Ben to get on camera and show you, but alas, he says, "Mom, I really don't like being on camera. I don't want to do this." So he said, you can just tell them that his opinion of the soup was that he liked it, but it was not his favorite. Now let's talk a little bit about storing these items, because like I said, this is fantastic. You could use this as part of a very highly nutritious food storage program and make this, once a week or twice a week or whatever it is that your family would like. If you are going to store this, you can store all of these ingredients separately, which for some people works out really well. Now, if I were going to do this recipe and with each ingredient separately, what would that recipe be?
Just for one pot, we're looking at 3/4 of a cup of rice, 1/3 of a cup of barley. And again, this barley has a lot of calories. So I would probably tend to bump that up a little bit, but the recipe calls for 1/3 cup.
But I'm telling you, I wouldn't bump that up, because what happens with the barley is when it goes in, it's nice and soft, but then it really swells and it makes the soup really thick. And so I like that number, but it's okay if you want to add more, right? Because this is your own creation.
That's right. And then 1/4 cup of small red beans, 1/4 cup of lentils, 1/4 cup of black beans, 1/8 of a cup of split peas, and 1/8 of a cup of, in our case, the white beans.
Yeah, no garbanzo beans here. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and then you're just going to need enough water. And how much water did you use in this case?
I like about 1 gallon of water. The recipe says for 6 to 7 quarts of water. I thought that was way too much water. So if you like your soup very, very runny, that would be great. But I like it a little bit more hearty, where there's liquid in it, but it's not quite a stew, but it's a very hearty soup without a ton of liquid. Then salt, right? And we talked about the vegetables. Add all the vegetables that you can possibly think of, and not let stuff go to waste. That's some of the beauty of this soup. And then like the bouillon or whatever you want to flavor it with, that's what you want to do. So if you want, you can totally store all of these separately and then just dish out that and put them into your soup. Another method would be to store it all in one bucket. A lot of these, we might need these different size bags. These are Wallaby bags, and they have this kit that has 3 different sizes in it, which is really nice. And you could store them all in separate bags, but personally what I would do is, if this entire bucket was just to make this soup, I would mix together the black beans, the white beans, and the red beans in one Mylar bag. Now, by putting an oxygen absorber in there, you make sure that you're getting rid of the critters, any bugs or insects that might be in there, or their eggs. And then I would do another bag that has the other ingredients that I would add last, which is the rice, the split peas, the lentils, and the barley. Now you could keep those all separate if you want. And if you would prefer, you could add the lentils and the split peas when you do the beans. But if you're soaking the beans, lentils and split peas usually don't need to be soaked. So you could totally decide that. But then in the same bucket, I would put some of the basics. Like we have these onions and these carrots. And you could open this can, put some of them in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber. You could put it in a quart jar. I'm not going to need this whole thing of carrots. I don't think I would use that many. Same thing with the onions. You could also put the salt that you needed, or you could put these, right? Put it all in the bucket with the recipe and seal it. Now, everything should last for 25 years or so, depending on the storage temperature. You want me to put that down so you don't have to hold it? Now, there is a question about storing pearl barley and whether or not you can use oxygen absorbers with it. And that's a really good question, because there is a site, it's the LDS site, that talks about safe long-term food storage. And in it, it says that pearl barley is not a good candidate for long-term storage. So pearl barley, the reason why it doesn't store really long is the same reason that brown rice won't store for a really long time. So you really have to think about that. This is probably one of the limiting factors. So you might not want to mix this with the other ingredients, but the moisture content is low enough that it is safe to store with an oxygen absorber and not be at risk for botulism. So the other thing that you could do is you could just store it in quart jars. You could put the beans, you put an oxygen absorber in the bottom, mix the beans together, and then put something like a plastic sandwich bag or something where you've put the other ingredients so that they're not going to mix with the beans, and put it on top here. And then you can add another little bag, like a little snack bag that has seasonings if you want. But you could store a dinner at a time just in a bottle and put it on your shelf. So when you're ready to make this, you just pull out your bottle and it's all there. And because you've stored it in this bottle with an oxygen absorber, you can still have a super long shelf life. What's the risk for the bottle? There's two risks, right?
Light and then breakage. Just have to manage those.
Yeah, and so store it in a dark room, because light will degrade the food. And that's actually not a bad idea. If you're not gonna wanna make the whole pot, say that you're only one person, you could use a pint jar, right? Just tailor this any way that you want to so that it fits the needs of you and your family.
The best place we've found to get things like the carrots and the onions and beans and such is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints home storage centers. You can look that up. We don't have any affiliation with them, but they have great foods at a great price, great place to get them.
So now John hasn't tasted this yet, because when he made it, when I made it, he was gone. And this kind of thickens as it cooks, the more it cooks, because the rice and the barley that's in it, it gets thicker and thicker. And if you put it in the fridge the next day, you're probably going to need to add more water, because it really does get thick. And this one doesn't have any meat in it. Personally, I would have loved to put some meat in it. Hamburger would go great in it. Chicken would go good in it, right? Whether it's canned or such. We have both home bottled hamburger and freeze dried hamburger that's shelf stable that would work really well in here. So what do you think?
It's actually very good.
What do you like about it? What do you not like about it?
The texture's a little different, but...
Because of the rice, right? The cooked rice?
Yes, but otherwise, it's really quite tasty. I don't know what you flavored it with.
I had some of our homemade chicken broth and salt.
Okay. So that's perfect. It's very, very tasty.
It does have a little bit of garlic in it, freeze-dried garlic.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. Now, let me ask a question. Would you rather have had the rice cooked separately and then pour the soup over the rice?
Either way would be
okay with you?
Just be fine with me.
Okay.
This is very tasty though, and maybe a little bit surprisingly so.
Kind of interesting. Very basic.
But it is very tasty.
But yeah, I think it tasted pretty good too. Now, when we're serving something like this, personally, I would really like we have the homemade bread. I mixed up, this bread is made with whole wheat, salt, yeast, some applesauce, and sunflower lecithin. And yet, oh no, it has everything bagel spice on it, but very basic. There's no white flour in it, it's just ground whole wheat. And that's one of the reasons why whole wheat is a really good thing to have in your food storage. So as far as cost goes, I made 4 loaves of bread, and it probably cost me less than $2 to make 4 loaves of bread.
Yeah.
Now tell us about the cost. Oh, before we do that. See, I can't have that bread because whatever I do has to be, I have to use the natural yeast because I have a gluten issue, but I don't have an issue with it if it's been fermented with the natural yeast or the sourdough process. So these crackers I can have with the soup because I just use the starch to make those. Now talk to us about the cost of the soup.
Okay, for the 7 main ingredients, all the beans, the lentils, split peas, the rice, and the barley, for that bucket, we're looking at less than $50. And we bought these just at the store. If you were buying in bulk, you could probably get that price down even further. And this makes between 40 and 50 meals. So we're looking at about $1 a meal. That qualifies it as a frugal friendly food.
Very frugal friendly.
So yeah, it's about $1 a batch for good food. Now again, you have to add something to this, things like bread, additions to the soup to get your caloric requirements and your other nutrients. But as a great soup, this is really good and very, very economical.
I think ice cream for dessert would be wonderful with this. That's not very frugal friendly, is it?
Probably not, and probably not very shelf stable, except the freeze dried, I guess that.
Oh, freeze-dried ice cream, that's right.
Yeah,
You can all be chomping on that. It really is pretty good. So, frugal friendly? Absolutely. Easy to make? Yes. On the stovetop, it's going to take about 2 hours. In the Instant Pot, it took less than an hour. So when you're looking at time, and I didn't have to, with the Instant Pot, I didn't have to babysit it at all, right? If on the stove, you're gonna have to babysit it a little bit. But one of the great things about the soup is Scotch broth. It's known for adding any kind of vegetables that you have, right? Things that were left over from the night before or like random stuff in your fridge, you could put in there and
it all rounds out the nutrition. So.
Yeah, and that way it helps us not to waste anything too. This is a stovetop pressure cooker, which can come in really handy because you could use it indoors or outdoors. I prefer my Instant Pot because I don't have to babysit it. But pressure cooking things like beans can really save on that cooking fuel. So whether you put it in a bucket or just store these ingredients separately, hopefully we have empowered you and helped you not be quite as afraid of beans and some of these other really cheap foods like lentils and split peas.
Now for the question of the day. What recipes can you provide and share that kind of do the same thing? It's a way of using good, nutritious foods very inexpensively. So comment below, and thanks for being part of the solution.